Well, welcome everyone. All right, it looks like we are going to get started. I see that people have slowed down in populating the room, so let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Maryland Virtual Training Institute. My name is Ellen Beatty, and I am your host today. And I just want to welcome you to day one of the Virtual Training Institute. We are so excited to kick off 3.5 days of professional development and learning opportunities with you. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you are having any technical issues, you can chat with me privately in the chat box and we will try to get those resolved for you. But if you are responding to something in the presentation, please make sure that you have panelists and attendees chosen for the two in the chat box, or else they automatically go to just the panelists. So we want everyone to be able to see your valuable comments. All right, so welcome. We have Karen Nelson with us from Prince George's Community College today, and she's going to present Paraphrase or Plagiarize, step-by-step guidelines for support ESL students. So welcome, Karen. We are so excited that you're here to share your expertise with us. As we get started, I'm going to launch a poll because we would love to know what your role is within your program. So I just launched that poll. If you can please go ahead and respond. All right, wonderful. It looks like, I'm going to share these results quickly with you, that we have a lot of ABE instructors with us today. So that is fantastic. Yes, paraphrasing or plagiarizing is a hot topic in all of our classes. So I am sure that you are as excited as I am to see Karen's presentation today. So with that, I'm going to turn us over to Karen.
Thank you. So can you hear me? Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Karen Nelson. Like I actually said, I come from Prince George's Community College, where I teach in adult education and ESL, and I also do a lot of curriculum development. So actually what I'm going to talk to you about today is curriculum that I've developed for our program there at Prince George's Community College. And it got started, this was my class, the year that I got started on this particular project. As you see, they all got their certificates, which was lovely. But there was a little bit of question in the meantime. And one of the main problems, one of the main reasons for that was that we had a lot of problems with copying, plagiarizing, something. I'm not quite sure how to call it. So we were reading the book Hidden Figures, which was wonderful. It was very inspiring. We had great discussions during class. They wrote essays about, did they want to be an astronaut? If they had a choice, would they be an astronaut or not? During class, we did that. We watched videos about it. We saw pieces of the film. We learned vocabulary from it, all this stuff, right? One of the activities that I wanted to do was have them write journal entries. So I would ask them a question. What kind of job did this person have at this time? How would you describe it? And things like that. And I started getting these answers back and thinking, well, that sounds awfully familiar. And then realizing that probably 2/3 of the class had more or less copied the passage word for word from the book, or maybe with a couple words missing. So then we had some stern conversations and I said, you need to use your own words. And then they handed in their next journals and I said, yes, 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 we're sorry. And then they handed in their next thing the week after, and it was almost exactly the same. And that went on for about 3 weeks. And I got sort of sterner and sterner. You really can't be doing this. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on in this situation. And I did eventually figure it out. And that's part of what I'm going to share with you, how we solved this problem, because they were a wonderful class. So the first thing that I started to look into is what exactly is plagiarism? And if you look on, for example, Turnitin, they list a whole bunch of different kinds of plagiarism. And I'm going to basically focus on the two ends of this spectrum. So one end is this cloning, submitting, like my students were doing, word for word exactly what was said in a book or someplace else that they saw. And the other end of the spectrum is including proper citation, but relying too closely on the text's original wording. So even if they say, here's where I got it, page 91 or whatever, but they're giving me almost exactly the same words. And I'm saying, but you're in an ESL class, how is it helping you to copy these words? So before we actually continue too much further, I would like to give you a chance. I would like to find out sort of what the attitudes are and what people are thinking about plagiarism. So we do have another poll, and it's about 5 questions, I think. Okay, so we're sharing results. We see a lot of frustration, and I agree. That was probably my primary reaction to that, and a lot of sadness. I'm actually really glad to see that there are people saying that they also feel tolerant of this in some way. I was trying to come up with an adjective that kind of conveys that, like, okay, here's a problem that we need to work with. Sometimes when I talk to teachers, I see people getting very sort of angry and righteous about, this is something that students need to know is wrong. And that's actually one of the things that that I guess I will be trying to convince you is we don't need to necessarily have that attitude, or that attitude may be misplaced in some situations. Ellen, is this poll, is it all 5 questions, or is it one question at a time?
It's one question at a time.
Oh, okay.
So I can move on to the next question if you're ready.
Goodness, yes, please.
This is the question about how common or serious is copying or plagiarism in your experience?
Yeah. I'm guessing people are going to say common and a problem, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be coming to this particular. All right. Okay. So we have a mixture. I'm not sure why people came if it's not a problem, but that's great. I'm glad to have you. There's actually are a lot of other reasons that you might want to think about teaching these skills to your students, not just the plagiarism part. So that's great. Yep. Go ahead. Do we have a next one? Okay.
Yep. This question asks, if you were able to show that a student copied on a paper or assignment, what is the most likely consequence you would use?
So this question I'm actually asking because I am curious to know, generally, not just for this talk, like what are teachers' responses to it? Okay, great. My partner teaches at a community college, at Montgomery Community College. He does give 0s and failing grades for assignments, and he has given failing grades for the class before. So I think that's an interesting contrast, but he teaches in credit and I teach in non-credit. So yeah, I would be on the concerned but supportive side.
All right, our 5th poll question asks, in your experience, why do students copy?
Okay, they don't understand. Well, great. So you're in the right place because that's what we're going to talk about. I would say that I've been surprised. I would say all four of these the last four are significant problems. Of course, there are students who sometimes just need to avoid some work, but I would say that all four of the last four are issues that I've had in my class. All right. So let's go.
All right, and Laura Frank in the chat box actually mentioned all of the above as her response.
Oh yeah, I should have had that as one of the options, I guess.
All right, and here's our final poll.
Oh, there's one more. Okay.
In your opinion, what is the most important reason for students to learn paraphrasing skills?
Yay. So yes, I agree. All of these, again, I should have had all of the above answer. All of these are good reasons. It can help with understanding of material, and we'll see an answer of that towards the end. I find with ESL students that improving their writing abilities is also a huge reason to talk about paraphrasing. All right, so thank you. That gives me an idea of where people are on this. Let's see if I can. Yes, it went forward. So one thing that before we actually get into the process, we talked a little bit about did I skip a slide? I feel like I skipped a slide. Oh, well. All right. Why students might paraphrase. I want to think about some other reasons, some questions. And one of those is, are there texts that you would not paraphrase? So in our culture, for example, if I reference Hamlet or if I reference Romeo and Juliet, I might assume that everyone is understanding. And it might even sound a little bit insulting if I were to say, oh, by the way, to be or not to be, that comes from Hamlet. Because it might sound like I think you don't know that comes from Hamlet. So there might be texts that I would not cite or paraphrase. And I think when specifically the students that I'm teaching, so most of them are coming from Central America, from parts of the Middle East, from all over Africa. They may come from cultures that are that stress originality and individual ownership less and stress sort of communal and consensus approaches much more. So that may influence how they intuitively feel about it. And I'm not saying it's wrong to teach them that these are American academic norms, but just that that is a conversation that needs to happen, not something that can be assumed. And I was actually talking to my daughter about this last night. She's 19, and I was saying, I'm going to give this talk, and I'm going to use this example about Hamlet. And obviously, nobody would ever paraphrase Shakespeare because that would sound silly. And she, being a millennial, immediately picked up her phone and said, oh, no, people do that all the time. She's like, here, look at Sparknotes. To be or not to be, that is the question. And Sparknotes says, the question is it better to be alive or dead? Is it nobler to put up with all the nasty things that luck throws your way, or to fight against all those troubles by simply putting an end to them? So that is her contribution to the talk. Yes, people do paraphrase, but in the case of Shakespeare, and in the case of some other texts, I might say, you know, paraphrasing is not a great idea. All right, so are you sure that your students know when they should cite or paraphrase? So that's the first question. This question of what is considered common knowledge, what is fair game for paraphrasing, what should be cited? The next question is, do your students know what in your own words means? And this goes back to the hidden figures conundrum, where I kept saying with great importance and stress, you need to put this in your own words. And they would say, okay, teacher. And after about 3 weeks, I realized that they didn't know what in your own words meant, because I had a student who came up and said, I don't understand. I took the paper, I took my pencil, I wrote every word on there. They are my own words. I didn't copy and paste anything. I wrote the words. And I realized that in your own words, it didn't really have a meaning to them. And so they didn't even realize that they didn't understand what I was asking them to do. They didn't realize that there was a missing piece there. And I started to also try to put myself in my students' shoes. I speak Spanish reasonably well. I've traveled in, Mexico and studied Spanish in high school, and I can generally get around. I can do whatever I need to do in Spanish. But if you ask me to paraphrase a sentence, salí a caminar con mi perro, I went for a walk with my dog, like I would say, oh, the words are there. Like my mind goes blank. I have no idea how to start that sentence in another way or how to do something else with that sentence. And with ESL students in particular, and I know many of you don't actually teach ESL, but with ESL students in particular, once they see the words in a certain order, that in a way like takes up all the cognitive space in their brain, so that putting them in a different order is very difficult. So what we need is a process for doing that. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about, is what that process is. What are the skills that they need? So a process, and you see a little bit of a hint here, but what I'd like is for people to take just like 1 minute on the chat and put down when you teach paraphrasing, to the extent that you do, or if you don't, think about it. What are the kinds of steps that you see as being necessary? So just bullet points. We don't need paragraphs or anything like that. Why am I not seeing the chat? Reread. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So discussing the material with their peers. What's the main idea? Talk out loud. I think that talking does help because we're obviously going to say something differently than how we write it. Stating in your own words. Check for understanding of meaning and vocabulary for sure. Read for meaning, say it out loud, summarize, access. Some practices in grammar with changing sentence structure. We're going to talk about that a lot. Yes, put the material away. I love that one. I have them read it and then turn the paper over. Don't look at it. Look for synonyms for sure. Practice direct speech. Yes, we're going to talk about direct and indirect speech and reporting. Replace words with synonyms. All right, good. So when I'm talking, I hope that you will think about how are the steps that I'm breaking it down, probably into more steps. How do they fit with the steps that you use? Are there things that you can add? Are there things that you wouldn't do? All that kind of stuff. All right, so I break it down into sort of two main things going on. And the first one is what I would call media style reporting. So reported speech rather than paraphrasing. And the second one is academic paraphrasing. And I do them as sort of a 1-2. So the first thing that's simpler to learn is how to report the speech. And then the second thing that they also need to add on to that is the paraphrasing part. Let's go forward. There we go. So first, we talk about verbs of reporting. And this is from a chapter in the book that I wrote for this writing class. So the entire chapter uses examples mainly from Michelle Obama and from the Obama's time in the White House. So we're looking, the first thing is we talk about what are the verbs of reporting. I also teach a TOEFL prep class. So in that we get a lot into what are the different verbs and synonyms that they should use, and how are those different? How do they have different meanings? So these start from the sort of more neutral to the more extreme, from propose, argue, demonstrate to prove, from promise to swear to vow and things like that. So we talk about what are these different verbs of reporting. And then somebody wrote in the chat sentence patterns, and I absolutely love sentence patterns. The entire book is based on sentence patterns. So one of the early things that we do way before that in Unit 2 is we talk about how do you use the sentence pattern for an opinion or for a reported speech. So I think that. Sentence patterns, I don't use Legos, but you can kind of think of them like Legos. They're like pieces of language, chunks of language that you put together in a certain order, and it makes a grammatical sentence. And it sort of simplifies, rather than having to think about every single part of the sentence, you have a pattern. And when you replace words in there, you end up with another sentence that also makes sense. And we use a lot of marking, so I use underline for the subject and circle for the verb. So here we have I think, subject verb. That is my conjunction. And then we have another subject verb that allows us to have this whole sentence that is all grammatical. All right, so the complete step here is you use a verb reporting and that. So Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. And if we want to report that, we don't need to change her words because we're just reporting. That's what reporters do. They don't change words. They just make sure that it all is grammatically correct. Michelle Obama said that when they go low, we go high. So that's our first step. We're just going to change it into reported speech. But there's a few more things that you have to do when you change it into reported speech. And specifically, you need to make sure that you maintain the point of view. So then the next step that we do is we look at a quote, a direct quote, right? A direct quote, and then we change that direct quote into an indirect quote, and we look at what words need to change. And I ask them to take out their highlighter, and they all have paper copies of the book at home, so they highlight on the book. But it ends up looking like this, right? So we're adding the word that, where they love to tell me we change the capital letter to a small, to not capital letter. But then we need to change our pronouns. I changes to she, and me and our changes to her and their. And we talk a lot about pronouns and which ones change. And we do a lot more exercises like this so that they can change those pronouns easily. Okay, also in maintaining point of view, we want to talk about not just who is talking. It's not going forwards. Give me a second. Nope, that went forward a whole bunch. Okay, we also need to think about when something, sorry, I was having a lot of trouble getting the slides to, there we go. Okay, we also need to change present tense to past tense in most cases. So we talk about how when you use a direct quote, you have to use the exact word that the person said, but when you do an indirect quote, you're going to change so that the verbs make sense. And we've also talked a lot in the class about what are the different tenses. We have a progressive tense. So when we change a progressive tense, we're going to go from the present progressive to the past progressive. And when we change a simple tense, we're going to go from the present simple to the present past. Sorry, past simple. So now we've got a good, we're talking about them getting their dog. Malia and Sasha are hoping for a pet. They want a dog. In 2008, Ms. Obama revealed that Malia and Sasha were hoping for a pet and they wanted a dog. All right. So then we do some more of these kinds of exercises where they're going to change both the pronouns, the possessives, and the verb tenses. And this is actually pretty straightforward for students. It's mostly, it just needs to be pointed out to them so that they have a system for doing this. But once they see this list of pronouns and this list of verb tenses, they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. That is not stressful. That's straightforward, that's easy. So that becomes kind of an easy, almost warm-up kind of exercise to do. And there's our marking all the things that need to change in those particular exercises. I also talk a little bit at this point about using ellipses, and I introduce that, or 3 dots, or 3 periods, 3 dots. And say, for example, you can't do something like take out the word don't when you use it. You can't change the meaning. You can't take that out and say the movie was great. So we talk about that a little bit. That's going to become a lot more important when we get more into the academic paraphrasing. And we do some exercises. So here's a quote. I think during this election, I believe, we all play a role in this democracy. We need to remember the power of every vote. I continue to keep myself connected to a force that's larger and more potent than any one election or leader or news story. And that's optimism. For me, this is a form of faith and an antidote to fear. And then we practice saying which part of that quote do we want to use? Because a lot of times what students do is they come up with these very long quotes or very long things to paraphrase, and that's very difficult. So if we can sort of narrow down the amount of work by just picking the important part, that is very helpful. And different students are going to do this differently. So one student might say, we all play a role in this democracy. It's a force that's larger and more potent than any one election. Or another student might pick a different part of that. Okay, we need to remember the power of every vote. That is larger and more potent than any one election. This is in part what people were talking about in the beginning of make sure that you talk this out, that you say this orally, because that is going to naturally emphasize different parts. All right, so a summary of this part of media style reporting. We're going to use the verb of reporting, usually with the word that. We're going to make sure that the point of view is correct, that we have who and when, and we're going to choose what is important to keep. Okay. So that's sort of the easy steps. Then the harder steps are the academic paraphrasing. And I saw exactly when we did in the chat, these are the two things people talked about, synonyms and sentence structures. I started saying to my students, change the words, but not the idea. Instead of use your own words, I say change the words, but don't change the idea. Or more lately, I've been saying change the words and grammar, but not the idea. And I actually like to start here. Very strange. Sometimes it goes forward and sometimes it does not. Okay. Ellen, can you tell why it's not going forward?
I cannot. I can just see what you see.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think it's frozen, but I'm going to stop and reshare and see if that.
Yeah, try that.
Or just new share and see if that unfreezes it. Okay, there we go. I actually like to start with a sentence structure for reasons that I think will become apparent in a minute. So we play a game called Is This Plagiarism? It's a game, you know, as ESL games go, I guess it's a game. And in this case, we have the White House vegetable garden as our example. So we start with, what happens if you just change some of the words? Obama has spent the bulk of her time in the White House doing something unprecedented, pushing hard against childhood obesity. We can change that by adding, by swapping out for some synonyms. Obama has spent the bulk of her tenure doing something that had never been done before, fighting hard against childhood obesity. Okay, 30 seconds in the chat. Plagiarism, yes or no? What do you think? Yes. Yep. So this is still would be considered plagiarism, even though we have definitely done a very nice job of changing some words here. Still plagiarism. All right. Let's try another one. What if we rearrange the phrases? So we start out with, observers said this administration, largely because of the First Lady's focus, will have more of an impact on obesity in this country than any other in recent history. And we change the phrases around. Largely because of the First Lady's focus, the Obama administration will have more of an impact than any other in recent history on obesity in the country. And the green shows you all the things that we changed. So yes or no? Yes, still plagiarism. All right, let's try another one. Obama planted a garden, waged snappy social media campaigns, and worked behind the scenes with a whole bunch of people to quietly change what Americans eat. And reworded to, there were a wide range of activities that helped Obama influence our American diet, including her White House vegetable garden, her social media campaigns, and her work with people who have the power to make decisions. Yes or no? So we have success, right? So what's changed here? We started out with Obama as our subject, and here we have a different subject. There were, and then instead of the actions that Obama took, we can talk about the range of activities. Okay, so basically what the big change, there's a lot of small changes, but the big change is that we change the subject of the sentence. So let's talk about that for a minute. Okay, so when we teach the sentence patterns, we actually teach something like 18 different sentence patterns. So this particular unit comes towards the end of a 3-course sequence. So they should at this point know about 18 different patterns for sentences. A lot of them are subject-verb sentences, but there's also some that are what I call dummy subjects. It is, or there are. So we can use a lot of these different sentence patterns to rework those sentences. And the nice thing about this, I think, is that you're not asking students to just come up with a different way to say it. Instead, you're saying, okay, here's a sentence that is subject-verb, and let's change it to this different pattern. And you already know some of the words that are going to be in this pattern. So how do you make this pattern work for this idea? Let's give some examples here. So in this sentence, Obama planted a garden, blah, blah, blah. So we read this before. Here are some different things that can be the subject. I highlighted them in different colors. So we can use the garden as a subject instead of Obama as a subject. In that case, we say, the White House garden showed Americans that they could eat in a different way, for example. Okay. Or we can use all these other people that are mentioned as our subject. And I'm, oh, sorry. I'll do that one. I'm going to kind of shorten that a little bit because there's a lot of people. So instead, I'm going to say scientists and experts helped Obama. So what did the scientists and experts do? They helped her work behind the scenes to change what Americans eat, for example. Or we could use Americans as the subject. So we can say Americans eat differently because Obama did X, Y, Z. Or even the American diet changed because of the work of blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're starting with these different things as subjects. And I think a really nice exercise is just to take a sentence that's a little bit longer, not a real short sentence, and look at all the different things that could be a subject in that sentence. So I've only done some of them. Obviously, social media campaigns could be a subject, right? Well, I guess that's basically all the things I can think of. We can also have these dummy subjects. So it was crucial that Obama showed how a garden could change Americans' diet, for example, something like that. Or there was, which was the one that I used before. There was a lot of hidden work involved in, okay, so we have a lot of different things that we can use as a subject. Once we start the subject, because the students have a sentence pattern, they can kind of keep going with that sentence pattern, but it just gets them started. It gets them someplace, a foothold in being able to rearrange this. Nope, it went forward one too far. Let's see. What I want to make sure that people don't think that I'm saying when we change the subject. Okay. What we are not saying is change this to a passive voice. So we're not saying, instead of saying Obama planted a garden, say the White House garden was planted by Obama, or Americans were asked to change, or the American diet was changed by Obama's efforts, or worst of all, scientists and experts were collaborated with by Obama, right? Okay, this is generally just rearranging, and it makes your writing sound horrible. It's more complicated. That's not what we're trying to do. Okay, so when we find a new subject, we then have to also rethink about what is our verb. What did that subject do, not what was done to that subject. All right, so once we have we've changed the sentence pattern, then I think we can start talking about synonyms. And a thing that I do at the beginning of most of my classes, once I get to higher level students, is that the teacher is going to give a word of the day, and I'm going to ask them, or I give the word of the day, I'm going to ask them to come up with synonyms. And we generally do this in breakout rooms for 3 minutes. I mean, in the classroom, we just did it by gathering around the table, but it works really well in breakout rooms too. They're going to list their synonyms. They have to keep the same part of speech. So if it's an adjective, it has to be an adjective. They're not allowed to use their phones or ask their kids. And then we get back to the full group, and each synonym that their group has that is unique becomes 1 point. So we're going to, let's see, do we have time? What time is it? Yeah, we have time. Okay, so we're going to give it a try. Our synonym, our word of the day is delicious, and you have, I don't think you need to type it in the chat, but just write down, jot down on paper as many synonyms as you can think of. I'm going to do it for 1 minute instead of 3. Okay, how many synonyms can you think of for delicious? All right, I'm going to show you what my students came up with in a minute. But I wanted to note that the first time that I do this, generally each group will get like 1 or 2. They'll say good and maybe tasty, and that's it. That's all that they will be able to think of. And again, I think it's that you know, language thing going on. It's English versus their own language. Maybe in their own language they know lots of words for food that tastes good, but in English they've kind of narrowed into this one particular word. And as we do this through the weeks, they start getting more and more. So by the end of the semester, they can think of lots of synonyms. But we talk about it being like warm-up exercises, like, you know, doing jumping jacks or something. It helps warm up your brain and get things flowing. All right, here's what my students came up with. There's some of them working in a group back when we were still in the classroom. So the purple team had tasty, yummy, good, sweet, and juicy. So if you wrote down any of these, you now need to cross them out. The blue group wrote good, juicy, crispy, and well prepared. So if you have any of those, cross them out. And the red group wrote flavorful, delish, good, tasty, wonderful, amazing, spicy. Okay, that's questionable, but fine. Fresh and seasoned. So the unique synonyms, there's 2 for the purple group, 2 for the blue group, and 5 for the red group. And I don't know, you can write in the chat. Did you get any that my students didn't get? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Exquisite. Oh my goodness. Enjoyable. Scrumptious. Yeah, we didn't have scrumptious in there. Good tasting, savory, appetizing. Awesome. So you got some. Nice. So once we've done this a few times, then we start talking about how can you find more synonyms? And what most people are going to do, oh, sorry, one more thing to show you before that. Delectable, I love it. What happens when students are looking for synonyms, but it's not quite working the way they think it works, or I do not think this word means what you think it means. So Obama has spent the bulk of her time in the White House doing something unprecedented might become Obama has spent the massiveness of her pace in the White House doing something newfangled, efforting hard against childhood rotundness. And my partner who teaches at Montgomery College, he teaches economics, and he often gets essays that sound like this. And he will be looking at them going, what in the world is this person trying to say? And then it'll dawn on us, oh, they took something that made sense and they substituted in a bunch of synonyms and it no longer makes sense. And it's plagiarism. It's still plagiarism. So what's happened here? Massiveness, this is just the wrong word. Bulk massiveness is a wrong meaning. This one, pace, is the wrong part of speech. Instead of time, we have a verb here, to pace. This one is too colloquial, right? Newfangled instead of unprecedented is just too informal. Efforting, this is really the wrong meaning because we have the wrong part of speech and the meaning isn't there. And then rotundus, really, we're taking a technical term, which is obesity, that doesn't really have a synonym for it. I mean, with technical terms, I tell students just leave it the way it is, that's fine. So you end up with something that sounds pretty ridiculous. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to talk about with students, how can they avoid that happening? The first thing when they use the thesaurus is that a thesaurus will typically have different tags. And I use thesaurus.com. But I think this is probably true of most programs out there. So for example, the word farm has both a noun, it's a little hard to see on the slide, a noun and a verb meaning. So if they're on this tab, they're going to see all of the nouns for farm. And if they're on this tab, they're going to see all of the verbs. So as long as they can figure out, is this a noun or a verb, which is another thing that we do a lot of work on, a lot of practicing on. But once they can do that and they can tell me this is being used as a noun, then we need to go in here and find a noun that is a synonym. A patch on the White House lawn, it's preceded by an article, so that must mean that it is a noun also. So in this case, we have two nouns to choose between, and we need to look at that basic meaning, a piece, spot, or area, or a gap, something covering a gap or a lack. So a patch on the south lawn where the garden is planted does not have anything to do with a lack or a gap. So we're going to go to this tab. And finally, the entire Obama family, including the president, will pull weeds. Wow, it turns out there's a lot of meanings of the word weed that never occurred to me before I wrote this. So we have marijuana, we have plant, we have pot, we have threads, wardrobe, cigar, tobacco, clothes, and it goes on. So we need to find which is the correct one. And probably we're talking about they're going to be pulling out plants, not marijuana. Okay. The last thing that I make sure that the students understand about this thesaurus is this idea of register, or basically, is it formal? Is it informal? And I think students tend to think of register in terms of formal and informal, and they tend to think informal is bad. And that's something that I try to convince them is not actually the case, that we all use informal language when we communicate every day. There is a register sort of less formal. I don't want to say below, but less formal than that, which might be slang, might be dialect. There is also something else that is words that are offensive. So we talk about that informal does not necessarily make it bad, but it just means that it's not something that you're going to use in academic writing. And that there are some words like the word bunch or the word stuff that they're never really going to use in academic writing. You're not going to say, you know, there was a lot of stuff to do at the garden. I'm going to say there were a lot of tasks that Obama did at the garden. So we're looking for that formal or academic register. And in a thesaurus, usually, and this is definitely true for thesaurus.com, the first ones that are listed are going to be the formal register. The ones that are after that are more likely to be colloquial or informal, possibly humorous. So if the students are looking for a synonym for the word healthy and they choose something like rosy-cheeked, it's just going to sound weird. If they choose something like bushy-tailed, it's going to sound pretty amusing. And none of those are probably what they're going for. If they choose lusty, goodness. Okay, so I tell them, just avoid everything that is yellow rather than the darker orange. I think thesaurus.com has recently changed their color scheme, so now it's red, orange, and yellow or something. But I just tell them, choose what's in the first category, because those are going to be the most formal and the most sort of all-purpose. Okay, unless they really are already familiar with a word that is farther on. So these are things that we do together, and especially now that we're all teaching on Zoom, it's actually very easy for them to spend a lot of time looking at this online and making those decisions about what might be good synonyms. It's not foolproof. You can obviously still end up with some words that sound pretty weird when you make those substitutions, but it does avoid a lot of the problems. I do tell them, even once they've figured out some synonyms, if they can run it by somebody who is a native speaker, that's always a good thing, especially if it's an important, you know, a letter for a position or a paper that they're writing for a grade or something like that. That can be super helpful, but at least it avoids some of the most mistakes that they are possibly going to make. Just check the time. So, all right, so now we have basically a complete set of steps for academic paraphrasing. So I start with the media reporting. Well, actually, I start with cutting stuff because that makes it a lot easier. Prune down what you have to deal with, change it to reported speech, then change the subject. So you've changed the sentence pattern. Then go ahead and find your synonyms, and of course, always proofread at the end. So I want to, for the last couple minutes, just switch gears. And this is for the TOEFL class that I teach. So not the college prep class, but the TOEFL is a test that's usually used to get into places like University of Maryland, often graduate students. And they have, this is an actual TOEFL question, or at least what passes for an actual TOEFL question online, where they give a sentence, and then the students have to pick one of 4 paraphrases, which one is correct. And in order to do that, they really have to be able to do the paraphrase on their own. If you can't paraphrase, then you're going to look at all 4 of those possible paraphrases, and they're all going to look equally good, and it's very frustrating. So mesoscale convective thunderstorm events are most likely to occur in our models when a mass of rain-cooled air descends from the mountain, colliding with similar or larger sized volume of moist air on the plains and forcing it upwards. This is definitely a case where being able to restate, reading that several times, like somebody said early on in the chat, and being able to restate it or explain it to somebody is super helpful. Unfortunately, on the TOEFL, you have about 90 seconds, 50 seconds, something like that per question. So you kind of have to do that in a very compressed time frame. So here's our steps. Number 1, take things out. That's the first thing they say, cross stuff out. Thunderstorms occur in our models when cooled air descends from the mountains, colliding with moist air on the plains and forcing it upwards. Already, it's way more understandable. And we have a lot less stuff to deal with. Come on, go forward. I don't know why it sometimes, okay. Then we're going to do our reported speech. So thunderstorms occur. Thunderstorms occurred in their models when the cool air descended from the mountains. All right. And now we're going to start to think about how would this be rearranged. Models predict that, or cooled air causes, mountains release cool air. So these, what's in green are all things that could be possible subjects for your sentence. We're going to pick one of those. Hold on, I think it's freezing again. Now it's not even letting me do that. Come on, yes, new share. All right, what happened to where we are? Okay, so we're going to pick one of those in order to do the rephrasing. Cooled air causes thunderstorms when it descends from the mountains and descended from the mountains and collided with moist air on the plain, according to their model. So now we have a paraphrasing. And now we can go ahead and look for our synonyms. So we have lots of words that might have synonyms. And here I've listed a bunch of possible synonyms. Okay, so instead of cooled, we could say cold, chilled, refrigerated, reduced temperature, come down, go down, swoop, plunge, dip. We have lots and lots of possibilities for some synonyms. Notice that one word we're not trying to make a synonym for is thunderstorms. That's not a terribly technical term, but it's not something that you can really substitute with anything else. All right, so we ended up with, I substituted in a bunch of those synonyms. And rather than our first monstrosity of a sentence, we have what I think is a much better sentence. According to Tucker and Crook's model, chilled air caused thunderstorms when it came down from the peaks and ran into, should say just into, humid air on the flatlands. So when I have TOEFL level students, this is the paraphrasing that they learn to do. They're not actually doing that on the test, because on the test, there's going to be certain sentence patterns and subjects and all of that. But that's the first step so that they understand how those paraphrases happen and how they come about. And they also need to be able to do that when they're writing their essays, where they are actually paraphrasing two different sources and synthesizing them. And I think my last slide is just the steps again. And I don't know if we have a couple minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you, Karin. We definitely have a couple of minutes for questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to see if I can get my chat to go on. There we go.
I see one in the chat box to Professor Nelson. Are you saying that it is wisest to change the subject and to change a few words to synonyms?
So I would say that when you change the subject, it's going to force the rest of the sentence to change. So it's a way to get students started. It's like a foothold. It's not the only thing that you're going to need to do, because when you change the subject, you may need to change the verb as well. You're going to need to reorder things in order to do that, but it's a good place to start. And then, yes, I would definitely say you want to use synonyms. I think that, you know, I don't know why, but I remember learning how to paraphrase in like high school and following these kinds of steps. And it was very sort of mechanical. And then eventually it was something that I learned to do without the steps. And obviously we want students to eventually be able to do it without the steps, but I think the steps are a really good place for them to start. And then eventually it will become, they get the automaticity and all of that. But I think that when they start, it's really nice for them to have that kind of steps. I'm glad it's informative. Other questions? Yes, absolutely. Do you guys have the slides or?
We can include the slides when we have all of the resources up and available on the website.
Okay. Great. And if you're interested, I'm also happy to include the chapter from the book. So you're welcome to use any of those exercises or take them for inspiration or anything that's helpful.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
And yeah, because we wrote it, we don't have to worry about copyright, anything like that. So great. Yes, I would love to share it. So the book is available. I think that we would need to talk, but because it was written to be used, but we would love to have it used by other people. So definitely contact me if you're interested in using. So Laura wrote, what classes do you use this with? I use it with what we call advanced writing, which is a CASAS level advanced. And those are basically students who are trying to get into the community college. So they're taking the placement test for Prince George's Community College, and we're giving them a class that's helping them with their writing because that's a big part of the placement test. And then I also use it with the TOEFL, which, like I said, is like oftentimes I have students who already have a degree, but they want to get like a master's in the United States. And so that's why they're taking that class. So I use it at those two different levels.
Well, thank you again. This is such an amazing presentation, amazing content, something that we don't always address in adult literacy. So thank you so much for sharing. We still have a couple of minutes for questions, but to give you a couple of minutes to do that, I just want to bring your attention. I have a feedback survey. We're always looking for ways to create a better virtual training institute for all of you. So that link is in the chat box. I've also included the link for your proof of participation. We just ask that you submit your form for proof of participation once after you've watched all of the presentations that you'll be watching this week. So please also, I would remind you to keep an eye out on the content that's available over the next couple of days. We go through midday on Thursday with content for the Virtual Training Institute. All of the recordings and all of the presenters' materials will be available on our website, and you can look for that around the new year. Just give us a couple of weeks to get that all collected and ready for you.
I'm going to go ahead and put my email in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
So if you're interested in, whoops, there you go. So yeah, that's my email at PGCC. I got really nervous about this once I was talking about plagiarism. Like, I have to have every picture in there, source citation. And somebody asked about tips for summarizing. And I would actually say summarizing is one of the most difficult skills, to be honest, for students, for anybody. But one of the big things that I would start out again is choosing what content is the most important. So we start out by crossing things out, crossing out details, crossing out examples, crossing out phrases that are just emphasis or to repeat something that has already been said. And then we start doing some summarizing. And I also, in that case for summarizing, I teach a lot with note-taking. And when you're note-taking, you're sort of automatically trying to condense things down. So I think that helps. That's a nice segue into how do you summarize something. I will be using this. Oh, good. Yes, GED students for sure. I don't teach GED right now. I did a couple of years ago, but definitely super helpful for GED as well. And also I used to teach in the portfolio program, and I would have or I tutored rather, and I would have a lot of people come in and say, okay, well, here's my answer. And I would say, well, that's exactly the same thing that it said in the text. You can't just write that. But I think it was very difficult for them, confusing. I don't think that they were maliciously trying to copy it. I think they just didn't know where to get started. So good, yeah. Math and GED. Advanced reading. Definitely for advanced reading.
Absolutely, and so valuable for us preparing our students to move on, whether that is academically or professionally. This is such an important life skill for them to learn.
And I definitely have that conversation with them. Like, if you got a professor who really is, going to be a hard ass about this, you could fail a class. You could end up with an XF on your transcript. Like, this is an important thing for you to learn. And then it's important because you're going to be a better writer if you can paraphrase. Maybe you could paraphrase yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. This is such a fantastic presentation, and thank you all for your active participation. We appreciate you being here and spending some time with us. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to close us out, and we will see you hopefully later this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.